Thank you. Thank you. I'm Chris Wenzel, and a couple years ago, starting in the late 2015, I had the honor to participate in a group study of what is known as the Newtown area of Sarasota. It's the traditional segregated black community. Newtown existed, or began, the original Plats began in 1914, and the interesting part about Newtown was that it was still intact and whole without a lot of change and sway that we've seen in other historic black communities in Florida. So my component as an architect in architectural studies in urban planning and other topics was to document the historic architecture and urban growth of Newtown, and it became quite interesting. So I'm going to do the next slide, please, routine, rather than the clicker. So what we did, at first, we didn't really know where to go, and there wasn't really an awful lot of material, and that's one of the things that came out of the Newtown Alive study, was that there was a significant lack of historic material, both architecturally, urban planning, and then with the people. The Newtown Alive project interviewed some 80-odd oral interviews of old residents of Newtown, so that we could get an idea of what life was like. But beginning back in 1914, before Sarasota County was independent from Manatee County, the original Plats were constructed in the Newtown area, and we looked at those. We looked at city directories, census material, and what became the most interesting thing for me, and I suppose what I'd like to convey today, is what I learned from the soil maps and the topographic maps. And if I could have the next slide, please. Those are plats of the original Newtown area, and they don't really relate to land at all, but the original planning, beginning on the left side, I've got a pointer here, let's see if it works. These two plats were conducted in 1914, and we see a beginning of people moving into what was once an agricultural area, natural area, very early on in the history of Sarasota County. The map over to the right is, or the Plat, is from 1925. And it is a logical expansion of the growth of Newtown, and I want to talk to you about how that happened. Next slide, please. Very lightly gray and with the numbers scattered around were our documentation of what we believe to be original buildings dating all the way back to the 1920s. That still exist in the Newtown area. And so we began to get an idea of how the first settlements started to happen in that area and why. One of the most interesting things that doesn't appear in the Plat is this little area right there, which is a significant drainage canal. Next slide, please. All right, here's where it got really, really interesting. On the left was a 1959 soil survey map, and that was the earliest one I could find. But as mentioned before, Sarasota is filled, or Sarasota County, and Florida for that matter, is just filled, peppered with lower wetland areas. And you can see those in the little circles all around, all this area here. The original Newtown Plat that I talked about is right there, and then the second one that I talked about is right up here. This is Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, the Atlantic Coastline Railroad tracks to the east, and the Seaboard Coastline Railroad tracks to the west that run all the way into downtown Sarasota. By 1973, what you don't see here as a drainage canal, but was present, you see a lot of other drainage canals, and these going into these areas, all draining into Whitaker Bayou, and then eventually Sarasota Bay. Ooh, I need to hustle along. The growth in this area right here, which was original, is now gone up into this area right there. And why is that? Because the high ground is in between the low-lying areas. Next slide, please. Again, the growth area of Newtown in kind of a diagonal manner. Let me skip forward to the next slide. The old historic homes of Sarasota were all reacting to this tendency to flood and high water situations, why the drainage canals were put in. And next slide, please. You can see that in the architecture, the foundations were built up on piers, reacting to the high water and high level areas. And this was essentially the way the Newtown was built with respect to the water. Okay, so I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you.